Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. My guest on the show today is Stella Blake Kelly. And today, Stella's going to introduce us to something called the Product Swiss Army Knife for Geospatial Makers. And she is the founder of a consultancy called Cartizan. And what I'm really hoping that Stella can do for us today is help us understand how we should be thinking about making things, how we should be thinking about making products. What products are good to make? How do we start? What are the steps in the process? Now, some of you will be thinking, I don't want to make a product. I'm not trying to build a software as a service. The thing about Stella's Product Swiss Army Knife for Geospatial Makers is that it can be applied to almost any situation where there is an end consumer, where somebody is going to use the thing, the service that you make. And part of my motivation for wanting to create this podcast episode with Stella is that I am constantly getting emails from people saying, hey, look at this thing I've built. What do you think? Only to discover later on that it never went anywhere. And my guess is there's a lot of different reasons for why it didn't go anywhere. But when I talk to these people that have made something and want to show it to me, a lot of them have the goal of making money. They want this to be a product they can sell. They want to create a service. But it very rarely works out. And I'm really, really hoping that when you listen to this podcast, that this podcast will give you a framework for how you should be thinking about making products. And perhaps this framework will give you the structure you need to go out there and build something. Hey Stella, welcome to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today because this is going to be a slightly different kind of podcast episode. We're not going to focus on a technology as such. I guess in some ways we're going to focus on what it takes to build a technology, to build a product. You gave a workshop at last year's 2025 FOSS4G in Auckland. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend it, and it was all about building a product, and you walk people through the steps it takes to build a product. I thought today that would be, if I could throw myself under the bus, introduce you to something that I have made, and then you can rip it apart and we can all learn something from it. How does that sound?
That sounds great, Daniel, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
So we've jumped in pretty deep. Maybe we should take one step back, and could you briefly introduce yourself, please? Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. So my name's Stella Blake Kelly, originally from New Zealand, as you can probably tell from my accent. But I live in Sydney, Australia, where I founded Cartizan, which is a geospatial product and UX consultancy. And we help clients with the front end of their GIS systems. So that's their user interface, user experience, but also the overarching product strategy.
How did you get there? Like, what was your background? Do you come from a GIS cartography background, or did you have another path to get to starting Cartizan?
So I kind of followed my career via just falling into things I love and not really having much of a plan or strategy from the outset. So I discovered GIS when I was at Victoria University of Wellington studying a Bachelor of Science in Geography and Environmental Studies. And we had this amazing guest lecturer who had bright blue hair and was so enthusiastic about GS that I was very intrigued. And we had to do some courses on it, and I just fell in love with it. I always loved Lego as a kid, and so to me, GIS really scratches that itch with that kind of constrained creativity that's involved in building things. After uni, I moved to Australia, worked as a geospatial market analyst, and then got into product management. And then about 7.5 years ago, I quit my job to give being a freelancer a go. You know, I had 3 months savings to see me through, and I wasn't sure where I'd land, much to my mum's horror. But fast forward 7.5 years, and I've got my own business and have worked on so many different projects, and I've absolutely loved it. So that's how I've ended up here today, not by planning, but just by following the love of GIS.
Fantastic. Sounds like so many on this podcast before you were an accidental cartographer. So I'm going to ask you this question later on about starting your business and your sort of product building approach to that, and wonder how much of that you apply to your own business, but we'll save that for later on in the conversation. So as I said before, maybe a great way of approaching this topic of building things, of making products, is for me to tell you about something that I have made, and then you can rip it to shreds, and hopefully people can learn from that.
Sure. I like to create a supportive environment without ripping things to shreds because there's something to learn in everyone's pieces of work. But let's go for it.
Cool.
All right. So when clients get me on board, I like to pull out my Swiss Army knife of geospatial product thinking, which I've developed over the years, which has mainly come from poaching the research and theories that come out of the product space and also the design space and trying to translate and adapt them to the geospatial space because, we are a bit special. Things are a bit unique. And so there's kind of 7 tools that I like to whip out and use for projects with clients. So the first one is vision. Second is thinking about user needs. Third is the market and context it sits in. 4 is your features, so what you're going to have in it. And then the next ones are your prototypes and your user flows. That's number 5. Number 6 is a proof of concept. And last but not least is 7, which is launching, but not just launching, it's launching and learning. So, Daniel, perhaps you could tell us a bit about your product and where you're at, and then we can see what tools in the Swiss Army knife are most applicable to you.
Which tools you're going to use to shred it. Okay. Right. Okay. So I have, among many other tools I've created on mapscaping.com recently with the help of AI, because I'm not a coder in any way, shape, or form. I understand some of the technologies, and I'm just dangerous enough to be able to build something that works with AI. And I will say that I've made a ton of mistakes along the way. And if you go to mapscaping.com, you might be lucky enough to find some of those mistakes that are still, on the website. Anyway, in the last little while, I've been creating tools. So my reasoning for creating tools was that AI showed up. It's meant that the written word is, no one's coming to my website because of extra kind of information. Now they're finding it through AI. So I thought, let's start developing tools. And maybe if a tool works, perhaps I can develop that into a product. So the idea here is to attract people to my website through search engine optimization. So I've created just under about 200 of these tools. The one I want to introduce you today is called the Free Interactive Roof Area Calculator, I should say. And what it does is it's pretty simple. It uses a aerial imagery base layer. You get to search for a property address. So there's a geocoding function to this, or you can zoom to your location. It has some very simple tools where you can draw a polygon and you can edit those polygons. And as you edit the polygon, it creates measurements. So it'll give you the different areas of the roof. It'll try and calculate the pitch, the parameter, and you can export it as a PDF, and you get these measurements in feet and meters and whatever you want, really. So it's a pretty simple little tool, and it gets a little bit of attention. So people find it organically. So part of my approach to creating this simple tool was, again, this SEO first approach. So I knew that people were searching for this kind of thing. I looked at other websites and saw what they had and thought I could make something similar or slightly better. And then if you scroll down the page, you'll see a whole lot of words. And those words, I don't imagine any human is going to read those words because they're going to arrive on the page, they're going to look at the tool, and they're going to start using it. Those words are simply there for the search engine to index the page. Does that make sense so far?
It does. I guess just to clarify on the initial vision, because I'm assuming it's not because you want to empower people to know their roofs better. So it's to generate revenue off the back of Google ad views. Is that right?
Exactly. So part of the way I fund the podcast is through programmatic advertising on mapscaping.com. So if I win traffic, generate views of this thing here, people get shown those annoying ads, and I generate income from that, and I use that to fund Mapscaping, fund the podcast.
Wow, okay. The behind the scenes look. Interesting.
And I should add, so it's getting traffic. I can't remember the exact numbers. And the interesting thing about it doesn't get much traffic. So we're not talking about thousands and thousands of views a month or anything like that. But the interesting thing about it, the traffic it gets has a higher value. So I get paid more for the ads that are shown on this particular page than I do a lot of the other pages. And my guess is it's because it's got something to do with roofing. If people are trying to calculate the dimensions of their roof, they might be in need of a new roof. Let's say this is a very sort of simplistic example, but you get the idea. Advertisers are willing to spend more money to reach to be in front of those people.
Right, interesting. And so for me and also other listeners who aren't familiar with the exact pricing of programmatic ads, how do they know how much to charge for each of those users? Is it like cookies tracking you, following you as you're like trying to buy things and therefore they think, oh, you're going to be our target user of roofers and we'll charge more for your click?
I think that is definitely part of it. And I think too, part of it is probably around the keywords that it ranks for in Google. So if you go into Google AdWords, which I do from time to time, I haven't created any paid campaigns for a long time, but it's an interesting place to do research as in Google AdWords because you can start typing in these keywords that you might want to rank for, and you can see how much you might end up paying to rank first for that. And so, I don't know, a dentist in New York City, you'll pay a lot for that keyword. Maybe you'll be paying $50, $100 a click kind of thing for that keyword. And so my guess is it's a combination of these things. It's cookies. The internet knows a lot about the user that's coming to the site, and Google, these ad companies, understand the value of these different keywords.
That is really interesting. And that is a great source of evidence, I think, for you better understanding the market and the context, right? Because it's a whole bunch of data around your users and what they're looking for. Wait, have I interpreted that correctly? Sorry, I'm a
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
fuzzy on it. Okay.
No, that's exactly what's happening. So, and the reason I thought I'd introduce this particular tool app to you is because I thought it'd be an interesting use case. It's extremely simple. Anyone out there could make something similar. And my thing is with all these tools is if one of them takes off and I start getting significant amounts of, quote unquote, free traffic to it, maybe I can spin this off into an actual paid app and just redirect the URL that people are currently coming to a paid version of this, and perhaps create a micro SaaS.
Yeah. Okay. So just for me to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So the data that you have on the keywords is not so much what people are searching, it's how much money you could potentially be making for servicing relevant ads in that space. And therefore, what you're trying to do is figure out a tool that people need that also aligns with a certain user group that will attract high ads. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Wow, that's so interesting. And good on you for picking up on this as an idea. Obviously, people are so used to Googling general things, it makes complete sense that they're also Googling spatial queries. So, awesome idea. And I think, given that's your underlying kind of product idea, I think a lot of this thinking you might do for this product specifically will actually help you with all your other tools, right? Because you're kind of just repeating the process. It's just the context will change.
Exactly.
All right. So I mentioned before tool number one, vision. So I mean, the vision is about the revenue driving, right? So you want to have a really clear statement of what you're building and who it's for and why. So you're pretty clear in this, right? It's about revenue generating. So you want to make a tool that serves user groups who are also potential customers of high ad spends, basically. So I'll jump now into user needs. So this is the second tool. So this is when you understand your real users and their problems. So I guess the challenge with this is you might have some keywords that you know pay high ads, but you don't actually have much data into what the users are and what they're searching for. So what you've done is made a proof of concept and you've actually captured a lot of evidence that people are Googling this question, right? Or else they wouldn't be coming to your site. So you've kind of validated that there is a bit of user need there for needing to measure the roof. That's really great. But what you might want to think about more is who are they and why might they be Googling the roof? And is there anything else that they're trying to do as a part of that process? Because then that can give you some insights into the overarching problem they're trying to solve. And that also means there's more opportunities for your tools to create more traffic or potentially be a freemium product. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. One thing I could spend more time doing if I want to research this in more depth would be diving into Google Analytics, and I could start to see they chunk people up into these different categories of user groups and where people come from. And I have a Google Analytics cookie on my website, so I could do that, but I'm not talking to anyone, and there's no form on there to say, hey, what do you think of this? Or there's no, people can't leave a comment, which would help me out a lot. Even I love this tool. I wish it could. I've seen this on other sort of tool websites like mine where and people are leaving these really, really valuable comments. And I have nothing like that.
Yeah, right. So it is really common to have feedback forms and that kind of thing because it is so valuable to have insight into what users want. It's really important to understand their problems. And when you're thinking about user needs, what that means is actually understanding the real users and what their problems are. And that means having a really good understanding of what the problem is they're trying to solve, what the context is they're working in, and building up a bit of an evidence base because otherwise you're just working from assumptions and that creates real blind spots. It's so much easier to make a great product if you have empathy behind your design. And you can't build empathy unless you have a insight into who your users are and what their problems are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. With that in mind, what would you suggest I do?
All right, so there are lots of different exercises. You can just Google it online. How do I do some user stories? But basically, a really great way to capture these and step outside of yourself is to just get some little post it notes and do some user stories where you might define who the user is, what they're trying to do, and why. So, for example, as a solar panel marketer, I want to find potential customers with enough roof surface area so that I can reach out to them and provide a quote, right? So by doing that, you're simply stepping out of your mindset into the mindset of someone else and you're thinking about what the actual problem is for them and why they're trying to solve it. Because no one is ever thinking, God, I really need to go to that map and do something, right? I really need to go open that GIS tool. No, they're doing it so that they can solve a problem elsewhere. So that's why these exercises are so useful because you step outside of that technology mindset and you're thinking about who experiences this, what are they trying to do, and why do they struggle?
So one thing I have been doing, and I guess is a way of gathering more context, is looking for or going to a similar websites, who's offering a similar product. I look for what keywords they rank for. That gives me an idea of what people also are searching for, how they're arriving these other websites. Sometimes I can see where like the websites that are linking to them, and I can follow that page and I can go back to that page that links to their website and I can see, oh, that page is talking about this thing. Perhaps there's comments on that page where people are trying to solve a certain problem or using this tool in a certain way. And that gives me a little bit of context. Yeah, it's not incredibly easy. I have also toyed with the idea of getting an AI agent to look at the website, look at this page and tell me what they think of it.
Yeah, I mean, I have myself taken screenshots of tools or sent it to AI to get it to do a bit of a test. Obviously, it's not of the same quality as a human doing it, but look, it's better than nothing. But I think what you've just described about the research you've been doing, that's actually really important because that is your market context tool. All right. So that is where you're looking at the ecosystem that your product's going to fall within. So the tools, the data, the workflows, the constraints, and you're building an awareness of what currently already exists and you're understanding the limitations of those other tools, and you're focusing on the gaps or the pain points, because that's where your opportunity sits. And by doing that, you're making sure you're not just reinventing the wheel, right? So there might be some other tools out there, as you found, that kind of do the same thing. So you want to make sure that you've got something that's a point of difference, or that's solving a new problem, or that might just be it's got better SEO and a better UI. But doing this up front means that later on, you're not discovering those overlaps when you've already committed all of this time.
One thing a little that this research has helped me with is to understand features. So what kind of features should I be thinking about when I build these tools? What's missing? But I got to admit, I have a hard time figuring out which one I should build first, if that makes sense, where I should focus my time.
Well, I mean, what you've described is a really common problem where you have so many ideas for features and so many of them are possible now, and it can be really hard deciding which ones to choose from. But if you have already got a clear vision, you understand your user needs, so who they are and what they care about, and you understand that market context, it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier to have decision filters and prioritize those lists of features for what you should have in your MVP. Because your features should be tied to user needs and they should be like focused on a very clear MVP. And you should be able to park some in the not now list, because all of the ideas will be great, but some will be better than others. And having this discipline means that you can control your scope and focus your effort better, because this is what turns a weekend project into like a month-long project.
Yeah, and because I guess my strategy with this, I think I mentioned earlier, I've made about 200 of these tools, is to make them as quickly as possible. I do research around each one, following that process I talked about before. But my strategy is to make many of them and then let them sit in the internet, for 6 months, 8 months, see which one is winning in terms of getting organic traffic, which one are people resonating with, and then filtering that out like, oh, which one am I making the most ad revenue on, either via just sheer volume or because advertisers are willing to pay more, and then moving forward with that. So let's pretend now that I'm willing to move forward with this, and I want to create a mini SaaS out of it, given that I've just kind of rushed out and did a little bit of basic research and then created a tool. Now, it looks like a winner to me. I want to create a mini SaaS out of it. What should I be doing?
I would recommend going back to some of those previous tools I mentioned. So, obviously, ideally, you'd follow a bit of a process, but, the world isn't ideal. And often you'll find you'll be jumping between and, rethinking your vision once you talk to users or you do a bit of more market research, etc. So for this, I would think about what you've learned from your first proof of concept, which is that there's clearly demand for people needing to solve this problem, which is measuring the roofs. And then I would try and flesh out your understanding of who the current users are and what the bigger problem is they're trying to solve by using your tool. And once you have that picture in your mind, it's going to be a lot easier to have a think about what other features might be needed, but also whether it's even viable to create a SaaS product off the back of this.
When you say viable, what do you mean? In terms of my time, in terms of the resources it's going to take, or the potential income? What are we talking about?
So I guess it depends on your success metrics, right? So to me, the viability of this is going to be that for your invested time, you're going to get a return of value that is greater than that. So however much you're pricing your time, you're getting enough ad revenue that more than pays for that, right?
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm looking down your list and workflows and prototypes. So would you consider this a prototype or a minimum viable product? Or are we're not quite there yet?
Definitely say that this is a proof of concept, for sure. So to me, a proof of concept is just something that's tangible and it's like a working version of an idea. And that means that it's got real representative data. It's got like a bit of functionality. But the main thing is that it's been built to learn, which is what all of your tools have been done for, right? So they've been built so that you can learn which makes the most revenue from ads. And the reason this is especially important for geospatial tools in particular is that it makes spatial interactions real and actually easier to test with users, because it can be incredibly hard to test those just with like a diagram. Everyone says maps and features sound great, and then they go to use them, and there's generally a bit more friction involved. So you have validated that there's clearly some demand from these users for this type of tool. And then now it seems like what you're trying to do is you're trying to scale up that product. So that means either growing the number of users that are coming through or trying to refine it more to get more of those higher ad spends. Or you're trying to add more features that are upselling the current users so that maybe they pay for additional features that they might be interested in, and you're leveraging that existing user traffic.
Yeah, a lot to think about. I can see why we keep coming back to that original sort of market research and context, like know your users, because it's impossible to answer any of those questions without a solid understanding of who these people are and what they want.
Exactly. And you can make a guess. You could be like, hey AI, give me like 5 options to change this product, and then you could test them and see what happens. But this is where that value comes from for those user feedback forms, etc., that you've seen in other products, because that insight translates to direct product value that will save you money, because you're not having to spend money on iterating and testing different things, because the best designers of products are the users themselves. So that would be my first piece of advice. You've already got existing users. You could just include a little feedback form where you ask users to tell them what they thought about the site, maybe a bit of who they are, and then hopefully over time you'll accumulate enough data that it makes it a lot easier to make these decisions of what to do next.
This is a bit of a tangent, but so Mapscaping used to be an e-commerce store. And I remember falling into the exact trap that you're talking about. You just said that the user, they know what they want. They're the best creators of the product. In terms of like, if it's not working for them, then it's broken. It's not working. And I remember we made our website, incredibly proud of it. It looked terrible. And I just couldn't believe, why aren't people clicking this particular button? They needed to click this one button. And I just couldn't figure it out. Why is it not working? No one's moving, through this funnel, if you will. And I remember we installed a product on the website called Hotjar. And what it does is it makes a little heat map of where the user was moving around with their mouse. And it was fascinating. And so what happened was that they were never scrolling far enough to see the button, and therefore never clicking on the button. So we moved it up the page, like, I don't know, just higher on the page. They clicked the button, continued on down the funnel. It was incredible. It was so simple, but I could not see it until I'd had that feedback.
Yeah, it's so funny sometimes when you get to the stage of showing users your tool and you just assume they're going to use it in a certain way, and you find that they just don't. And I think that's a really good example of how, if you're just designing and you don't test it with anyone, you can have these blind spots because you have these inbuilt assumptions of, obviously they'll just scroll down, or obviously they'll just do this, but it's not necessarily the case. And so a good code of practice for doing your geospatial product development process is to actually just try and be as scientific as possible, right? Where you start with hypotheses and you approach with the view to validate or reject and change it, right? So you don't just assume everything is amazing. You break it down and you check it with other people, and they say either, yeah, it's good, or nah, it could be better. And then you iterate and you keep moving forward. And that's a real agile approach. And it's also one that means you need to work with a lot of humility and not just think that you're building the most beautiful thing ever.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. One thing I have noticed when you said that assumption that what I'm building is great, or this is the only way of doing it, I definitely have that when I'm building interfaces. It's always the same. I don't have a great concept in my mind of what it could look like. What are the possibilities here? I only know what I've seen before in the past, and I find it reflects in every interface that I have built. And the flow, like how people use the tool, it's basically always the same. It's a complete lack of imagination. And sometimes I wonder if, like, I'm sure there's another way of doing this, but also there must be some sort of value in having those recognizable patterns for people to follow. Where do you sort of sit on that? How do I know when I should break the pattern, and how do I know when I should follow the pattern in terms of user flow and processes?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think, like, taking a step back, I think that this is like a real tension point that the geospatial profession often struggles with a little bit, because we're trained to be precise and exact. And, when you go to uni, it's not much group work, it's all on you. And if I contrast that with the designers that I have worked with and how they're taught at university, they are taught to showcase their work and get feedback all the time. It's not a case of you need to be exact and perfect from the start. It's a evolving thing that you craft. And you do that by getting other people's perspectives and taking on their feedback, because you're there to kind of guide that making evolution, which is very different to how we're kind of taught to work as geospatial technical professionals, where you're expected to provide the exact thing as opposed to guiding through that journey of making. So, to go back to your question about patterns, it's the same principle of finding something and sense checking it and testing it and asking other people, does this work here or does it not work? Do I need to try something else? And if you were, say, designing a web application, let's say it's something digital twin about making mapping layers accessible, the GIS professional is probably going to revert to their user patterns, which are, you start with a map, you add some layers to it, you have some features, the user can navigate through, blah, 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 to get to it. Whereas from a design perspective, you take a step back and think about, okay, what's the user problem? And okay, how is that done elsewhere outside of GIS? And you might find some inspiration for user patterns. Maybe you look at Airbnb or some other spatially enabled tool and think about how that information and functionality is provided to users. And there might be some other patterns that are actually far more impactful than the traditional GIS user interface patterns. But again, you're testing, you're validating, you're being wrong so you can get right.
Yeah, well, okay. So I can see now that I have a lot of work to do. It's just an understanding the user, who's using this and what are they using it for? What do they want? That would inform the features I would create and if it's worth making, I guess, at the end of the day. Do you think I should be applying the same kind of process? Let's say I'm working in a government organization. I'm the GIS person there. I've got a mandate. I have to release this data to the world through APIs. Is this a process I can apply to that?
Absolutely. These foundations or lenses for the product development process apply to anything. It could apply to data, APIs, it could apply to print maps, anything you're trying to produce where the success is defined by an end person using it. So if you're applying it to a government enterprise situation with APIs, if the vision is purely because you have the belief of this data should be open, well, when you release it, sure, you're ticking that box, but you might not actually find you have any users, right? So if your success is defined as people using it, then your starting point could be looking for evidence of, okay, which is the greatest requested data set? Let's focus there. And then also, who are those users? Are those users going to be people who know what all the codes and fields are in this data set? Or do we need to make sure that we make them human readable? And maybe we need to have an even more detailed metadata schema with it than what we normally do. And maybe we can't assume that they have institutional knowledge. And then also, there's considering the market context. So is another government department actually already doing this, or have they gotten this in the works and we're going to overlap with them? Or is there a private sector thing? Maybe we shouldn't be investing in this. And then the proof of concept, I wish that this was compulsory for all tech projects in government, because it means that you're proving there's demand for it before you're making a huge investment. So yeah, these definitely could translate to anything that's being produced, whether it's data or tools or a physical map.
Thanks. I really appreciate that rundown. It made me think about some of the work that I've done in the past where it has been that the KPI has this needs to be open, so let's make it open. And I'm embarrassed to admit, I didn't really think beyond that. Well, my job was to make it open, so I did. But yeah, like whether it was used or not, like, or whether it could have been used more, whether we could have got more value on top of that if we'd done a better job of doing this market research, like figuring out who's it for, what's it for. Yeah, that's an open question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of not doing these things for my own company, right? It's always a lot easier when you're coming in from that external perspective, because when you are working, in an environment, you have so many other constraints. And I guess that's the real value of being a consultancy, is that you come in with a different perspective and a fresh set of eyes. I have lots of projects and products that I try to work on in my own time, and I fall into rabbit holes all the time.
Good. Thank you. That makes me feel more human. The workshop that you held at Phosphagy 2025 in Auckland, so you went through some of the things. My understanding is that you help people sort of start building a product. Were there any sort of trends in the products people wanted to build? Were there any particular problems they wanted to solve? Could you give us a bit of an idea of what other people were working on?
Yeah, so I ran the workshop because I love making things, and I find it really brings me a lot of energy to work to just tinker. And also, I love hearing about what other things people are making and just hearing about their experiences. So we had a huge range of products that people wanted to work on, ranging from a print map to a digital twin platform through to an internal tool. And everyone was at different stages of the process. And so providing this kind of clear, easy framework means that you can kind of step back from feeling completely overwhelmed of what should I do next, and kind of carve out some really tangible, clear tasks to help you get going. Because I find the greatest barrier to products is not anyone's smarts or discipline or whatever. It's just about having the energy to push through barriers and making sure that those barriers don't build up into something that's insurmountable. It's about breaking it up and just churning through it and keeping that momentum and not letting perfection get in the way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that not letting perfection get in the way of good enough, I think, is incredibly important. I have met so many people that have been working on amazing things, but they never launch it. Like it never turns into anything more because they're afraid that it's not perfect. So they never talk about it. They never do any marketing for it. They never tell their peers about it. And I find this too. So a lot of the tools that I've made, that they're nowhere near perfect. And I'm nervous about, sharing them on, let's say on social media, for example, on LinkedIn. And every time I do, someone always shows up and says, this is not good enough. This is wrong. It's not perfect every single time. And I think part of being a builder is just learning how to take that and saying, yes, you're right, that is valuable feedback. Sometimes it's valuable feedback anyway, and just keep moving forward. But that recognition that it's not perfect, it never will be perfect, but you'll never even get close unless you launch it and tell someone about it and get some feedback on it.
Absolutely. And I think it's entirely about the mindset you have, and having that humility and having the confidence in the process that you know that you're not going to be perfect. There are going to be things that need to be fixed, but that's just how it works. You don't just wake up one day and become an amazing tennis player. You practice, you get things wrong, you win, you lose. And the same thing with all of the, mass products that are out there. Most of them started as other things. So I think it's all in your head, and it also applies to enterprise as well. I've had so many projects where there's been so much effort put into developing it, and then it doesn't get released to the public because they are worried it's not good enough. And the problem behind that is about being perceived to being not very good or wasting money and that kind of thing, which is ultimately not conducive to innovation. And so I think part of it is like a cultural thing that you need to not be worried about showcasing your work and that there are flaws in it, because that's just part of the process and it's okay. And it should be okay for organizations who are embarking on developing a new product. And it should also be the same for people too.
It's interesting when we talk about a lot of the startups that we admire that go on to be amazing, they have this sort of scrappy nature about them and you hear people say that if you're not embarrassed by your first product, then you launch too late and all this kind of thing. And I think the underlying point here is that like get it out there as soon as possible and test it. And we admire that when it comes to startups, but when it comes to ourselves, where there's no way. I think all of a sudden when we are personally on the hook for it, it's not that exciting to get it out there and move fast and break things and experiment.
Yeah, totally. That being said, I think you can launch far too early. I've definitely witnessed that with other projects and even myself. And I think that's where probably the last tool that we haven't talked about comes in, which is about the launch and learn, and that the launch itself is a tool to learn from. And it's really important to not just launch and be done with it. You need to release it in a way that facilitates learning. So maybe you do a soft beta launch and you make sure you have clear feedback loops so that when people see it, they have a thought about it, they send it to you so you can learn. And you also have that mindset of iterating and knowing that your first release isn't going to be perfect. And the benefit of doing that in a staged way is that it de-risks the rollout. So it ensures continuous improvement and ultimately you have a more sustainable future for the project. Because otherwise you have a real pressure to get everything right the first time. There's no space to adapt and the product might just stagnate or be quietly abandoned. So thinking about how you launch is also an incredibly important thing to do in the product development process.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I'm not advocating for people just to create slop and vomit it out onto the internet. I think you should take your time. You should be thoughtful about the things that we put into the world for sure. Right? There's a fine balance there between being thoughtful and waiting too long and never getting it out there. And I think that's going to be a personal sort of limit. I think everybody's going to have to find out where it is for themselves. But yeah, I know from experience from some of the people I've talked to that it is a real problem. People sit on things way too long, and unfortunately, their dream never gets realized because they just never got it out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, though, about the tension between getting it out there quickly, but also putting enough work into it so it's something of substance, right? Because as we have these amazing AI tools, you can so easily make a little proof of concept, spin it up. You said you've got 200 tools on your website, but that's going to have a impact on users, right? When it's a saturated marketplace and there are so many tools, how do you stand out there? And when you see the technology change in other spaces like, Facebook, and you're seeing the disruption of audiences across media and the news and things, what then differentiates you is actually your brand and trust. And so I feel like, not to navigate too much, the brand and trust is going to be as important, if not more important, than the features you have in your geospatial products when everyone can make a geospatial product with their AI tool.
I agree 100% with that. And I have been guilty of pushing that a little bit too far at times on mapscaping and had to sort of wind it back a little bit. But yeah, you're right. There's a real tension there, and that brand and trust there's no doubt about it. It's just going to become more and more important. I think brand and trust is going to be equal with distribution as well. So it's more of a marketing concept. I don't know if we need to dive into that today, but there's one thing to make a product. It's a whole nother thing to distribute it and to get it out there in the hands of people. And brand and being a trustworthy source is a big part of that distribution.
Totally. But I think that highlights the importance of GIS stepping outside its industry and stepping into other industries and kind of learning from them, like we're not going to be brand experts, we're geospatial experts. So we need to have diversity in our teams of skills and experiences so that our products can serve these other needs around brand and trust and marketing and distribution.
Yeah. Yep. Could not agree more. Stella, thank you very much. I think it's probably a good place to sort of wind up the conversation. I realize now that we've been talking about the Swiss Army knife of geospatial product thinking for a while, and we've used it as the reference point for this conversation. Can I link to this in the show notes somewhere so people can go and find it and see it for themselves?
Yes, absolutely. It's a toolkit that has not had a launch. So I'd be happy to do the soft launch with the Mapscaper audience. And I would love to get some feedback on where people agree, disagree, how it has translated to their experience with developing geospatial products.
Cool. Yeah, and then you can dog food your tool.
Exactly. I'll turn it into an AI plugin that you can have in QGIS.
Great. It sounds like a brilliant idea. I don't think you need to do any market research. I think you should just rush out and spend like 6 months making that.
I was thinking too.
Stella, again, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I really, really hope this helps and encourages people that are listening to this episode to get out there and build something, to try something. I think the worst thing that can happen is that you'll learn a new skill. So I really appreciate your time and helping give people a bit of a framework that they can use to think about the kinds of products they might want to build and what might be worth building.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Daniel. And just, a note to the audience, which was the title of my workshop, just get out there and build the thing.